Hi guys, I'm back with you to discuss the last of your poems that you need to have an understanding of for 12th grade English. Um, the first one I'm going to read today is by A.E. Housman, and it says in our textbooks on page 1060, A.E. Housman says in 1920, when I was about 17, Arthur George Orwell once recalled, I probably knew the whole of a Shropshire lad by heart. A.E. Housman published this book of poems in the early 1900s, and this first one is called To an Athlete Dying Young. And the unit question that goes is, what stage of life is best? We've talked about this many times in our discussions in British literature. To an athlete dying young. The time you won your town the race, we cheered you through the marketplace. Man and boy stood cheering by. At home we brought you shoulder high. Today, the road all runners come. Shoulder high we bring you home. And set you at your threshold down, townsman of a stiller town. Smart lad to slip betimes away from fields where glory does not stay. And early though the laurel grows, it withers quicker than the rose. Eyes the shady night has shut cannot see the record cut, and silence sounds no worse than cheers after earth has stopped the ears. Now you will not swell the rout of lads that wore their honors out, runners whom renown outran, and the name died before the man. So set before the echoes fade the fleet of foot on sill of shade, and hold to the low lintel up the still defended challenge cup. And round that early laureled head will flock to gaze the strengthless dead, and find unwithered on its curls the garland briefer than a girl's. Okay, so we see what happens in this poem is that an athlete who basically was very renowned in his small town won a race in the first stanza. In the second stanza, we see the road all runners come, all runners, all people will come to this place, which is the stiller place, which is a cemetery. And when they cheered him home, it meant they carried him on their shoulders when he was the winner of the race. They paraded him through the town because he was the winner of the race. Well, now they're carrying him on their shoulders, but they're setting him down at a stiller place. They are his pallbearers, and they're bringing him to a cemetery. And it says that in this case, he'll always be young and he'll always be the fastest because the name, he's actually dead. No one was going to break his record because no one's going to have an opportunity to because he died. Unlike some people who try to relive their glory days as a young person, it won't be the case for this person because they died young. And so sometimes it's even worse to live to see your record broken, to see that person when you're 35 break your touchdown record you made in high school. In this instant, that will never happen because this person died young. The next poem that we're going to talk about by A.E. Housman is called When I Was 1 and 20. I really like this poem because it talks about what it's like to be young and foolish, which none of you are. When I was 1 and 20, I heard a wise man say, give crowns and pounds and guineas, but not your heart away. Give pearls away and rubies, but keep your fancy free. But I was 1 and 20, no use to talk to me. When I was 1 and 20, I heard him say again, the heart out of the bosom was never given in vain. 'Tis paid with sighs aplenty, and sold for endless rue. And I am 2 and 20, and oh, 'tis true, 'tis true. So you can see I've almost memorized that one. So you can see the author gives advice. And so his advice is the wise man tells him, give crowns and pounds and guineas. So if you don't know, that is English currency. Give money, but keep your fancy free, which means don't give your heart to someone. Stay footloose and fancy free. Don't fall in love. Give pearls away and rubies, but keep your fancy free. And so we see in the first stanza, he's 1 in 20. You don't tell him anything. In the second stanza, we see he's told again, the heart out of the bosom was never given in vain. 'Tis paid with sighs of plenty and sold for endless rue. So basically, the sighs and the rue is sorrow. So he says, you're going to pay no matter what, even if you don't pay in money. And he's the last two lines, and I am 2 and 20, and oh, 'tis true, 'tis true. So he basically, we see in the last two lines that he did learn his lesson. He realized that what the wise man told him was correct, that he probably should not have given his heart away because he has paid with sorrow. The next author that we're going to read a poem of is Thomas Hardy, and he's on page 1068. The poem that we're going to read by him is Ah, Are You Digging My Grave? On My Grave. And the question that goes along with this poem is, would you rather keep your illusions? Now that's an interesting question because it asks us whether or not we would rather not know the truth or know the truth. And sometimes living in the dark is better. Okay, so I'm on page 1072. Ah, Are You Digging on My Grave by Thomas Hardy. Ah, are you digging on my grave, my loved one planting rue? No, yesterday he went to wed, one of the brightest wealth has bred. It cannot hurt her now, he said, that I should not be true. So we see the question is asked, and someone is answering. We don't know who is answering, but someone is answering. And the person that's asking the question is the dead person. Kind of strange, but bear with me. Stanza 2. Then who is digging on my grave, my nearest, dearest kin? Ah, no, they sit and think, what use? What good will planting flowers produce? No tendance of her mound can loose her spirit from death's skin. But someone digs upon my grave, my enemy, plotting sly. Nay, when she heard you had passed the gate that shuts on all flesh soon or late, she thought you no more worth her hate, and cares not where you lie. Then who is digging on my grave? Say, since I have not guessed. Oh, it is my mistress dear, it is I, my mistress dear, your little dog who still lives near. And much I hope my movement here has not disturbed your rest. Ah, yes, you dig upon my grave. Why, it flashed not on me that one true heart was left behind. What feeling do we ever find to equal among humankind a dog's fidelity? Mistress, I dug upon your grave to bury a bone in case I should be hungry near this spot. When passing on my daily trot, I am sorry, but I quite forgot it was your resting place. So we see this poor woman who somehow is able to still communicate beyond the grave, thinks someone, we don't know who, might be digging and planting flowers. And that is something we often do for loved ones. We put flowers, place flowers. Back then they didn't have like an artificial flower business. They would plant flowers, maybe perennials that would come back year to year around or on a person's grave. So she thinks that that's what's going on. And so the first stanza, is it her loved one? Is it her husband? No, he got remarried. In the second stanza, we're asked, well, was it her kinfolk? Was it her relatives? And no, was it them? They're thinking, no, there's no use in planting flowers. She's dead. She's not going to know. In the third stanza, was her enemy planting flowers, trying to get back at her somehow? And the third stanza, it answers, she thought you no more worth her hate, so she doesn't really care. In the fourth stanza, then we get the answer. It is the dog, your little dog who still lives near. And he does apologize and say, I hope I haven't disturbed your rest. And she, in the next stanza, she says, "I knew it was you. A dog's fidelity, a dog's always true, doesn't try to, um, hurt someone. A dog's always going to remain true even after death." And the dog sort of breaks her heart a little bit and says, "I was here to bury a bone. I forgot you even were here." So we see it. Her illusions were that she would be cherished and remembered after she died. Not so. The dog, even who is supposed to be man's best friend, basically said he forgot she was even there. So, kind of a sad, quirky kind of poem, but I enjoyed it. The next poem we're going to read is by T.S. Eliot, who's a very famous poet. He wrote several really interesting poems about the world falling apart, but this one is fun, and it's just interesting because it's about cats, which I love cats, and it's about practical naming of cats. And so I'm going to have to pull my book up a little closer because it is a little complicated and I don't want to mess up. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You make it think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. First of all, there's the name that the family uses daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor or Jonathan, George, or Bill Bailey, all of them sensible everyday names. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter, some for the gentlemen, some for the dames, such as Plato, Demus, Electra, Demeter, but all of them sensible everyday names. But I can tell you a cat needs a name that's particular, a name that's peculiar and more dignified, else how can he keep up his tail perpendicular, or spread out his whiskers, or cherish his pride? Of names of this kind I can give you a quorum, such as Munkenstrap, Quaxico, or Coricopat, such as Bombalurina or Delilorium. Names that never belong to more than one cat. But above and beyond, there's still one name left over, and that is the name that you never will guess. The name that no human research can discover, but the cat himself knows and will never confess. But when you notice a cat in profound meditation, the reason I tell you is always the same. His mind is engaged in rapt contemplation of the thought of the thought of the thought of his name, his ineffable, ineffable, his deep and inscrutable, singular name. And that's interesting. And yes, it was very hard, a tongue twister there in some places. This next poem is by William Butler Yeats, and he wrote at a time after World War II, and after World War I, and he had an idea that the world was coming to an end. And after World War I, all of Europe was in such turmoil and such destruction, he believed that it was the end of the world. And why might he believe something like this? Well, if everything around you or everything you've always known has been destroyed, he believed it was like the second coming or like Revelations. And if you've read any in Revelations, you understand a little bit about that is very like Armageddon, the end of the world. And so this is how this poet imagines that in the second coming. 1195. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand, the second coming. Hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of the spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with a lion's body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless in the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. So this is a very eerie, spooky kind of poem. turning and turning in the widening gyre. If you think about that, one of those gyroscope things they have like as a fair ride kind of thing. So it's all mixed up and scary. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. So the things that are happening, everyday things like a falcon and a falconer, which is one is the falconer is like in control. The falcon doesn't hear him. So all things are falling apart. Um, the blood dim tide. So we've talked about that red tide, the tide of blood, which you can read about in the Bible. Um, and the things of innocent are basically not happening anymore. So things like weddings and funerals and things like that, those innocent rituals aren't happening because it's the second coming. It's like Armageddon. And the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passion and intensity. So if you think about like the purge, the best are fearful and are hiding away, while the worst kind of people are out there with passion and intensity. And in the second stanza, it says it's the second coming is at hand. An image of the spiritus mundi, which is a Latin term to refer to the collective unconscious of the universe, which is kind of a weird thought that all the universe has this thought together at one time. Somewhere in some weird desert, this shape of a lion body in the head of a man. So if we think about that, that's in Egypt. That's the Sphinx. Remember, his nose is kind of fallen off. So basically, this Sphinx in Egypt stands up. It becomes a real being, and desert birds are flying away. Darkness drops, so nighttime falls. 20 centuries of stony sleep, so that's 2,000 years. We're vexed to nightmare, so this is all this stony sleep. Now we've come back alive. The Sphinx has come alive, and he slouches to Bethlehem to be born. So instead of having a Christ-like figure to save the world, we have this Antichrist figure, and he is coming, and he is going to Bethlehem to be born, which is very scary, and it's apocalyptic. Very scary poem. The last poem that I'm going to read is again by William Butler Yeats, who it says in the background, Yeats wrote this poem to commemorate the death of Major Robert Gregory, who was killed during World War I. The young soldier was the son of Yeats' patron, Lady Gregory, a leading figure in Irish literary renaissance. So he wrote this for his patron. A patron was someone who paid for an artist, a poet, or a writer to live. Sort of like through like a GoFundMe kind of thing. Wasn't GoFundMe back then, but basically this person, this very wealthy person, paid for him to be able to write. And their son died as a fighter pilot, which was a new thing in World War I. An Irish airman foresees his death, and that's on page 1244. I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. Those I fight I do not hate, those I guard I do not love. My country is Kilcarton Cross, my countrymen Kilcarton's poor. No likely end could bring them loss, or leave them happier than before. Nor law nor duty bade me fight, nor public men nor cheering crowds. A lonely impulse of delight drove me to this tumult in the clouds. I balance all, brought all to mine. The years to come seem waste of breath, a waste of breath the years behind. In balance what this life, this death. So we see here this person, an Irish airman, knows that he's going to die in battle. And so we see the reason that he went in the first place. And first, in the first few lines, we see, those I fight I do not hate, those I guard I do not love. So we see he has sort of an ambivalence toward the whole thing in general. He does not hate the Germans. And he doesn't say, well, I love my country so much I'm going to just lay down my life for it. He said, a lonely impulse of delight. There wasn't a cheering crowd. It wasn't that a sense of duty. He just said, think I want to fight. So we see it's kind of mixed emotions in that it wasn't really a love of country that bade him fight. He just sort of wanted to see what it was like. And now, it says the years to come seem waste of breath, the years behind. So we see this attitude toward war as a large waste. And many writers and politicians and people that write about war see it as a waste of young lives, a waste of lots and lots of money, and history views war in that way. It's a waste. And he says, a waste of breath the years behind in balance with this life, this death. So again, we see he knows he's going to die, and he sees it as a waste. The last poem that we're going to do today is When You Are Old. And I wanted to end with this poem because it is about a speaker addresses a woman he loved when in his youth, and she moves on to other people, but he stays in love with her. When you are old and gray and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read the dreams of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love, false or true? But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled, and paced upon the mountains overhead, and hid his face amid a crown of stars. So I want you to recall when you're old how we as readers have often looked down and tried to remember the good times. And so that's what this person's doing here. They're telling their loved one that when you get old, you're going to look back and you're going to remember how much I loved you. All the other people, they didn't love you. But you're going to remember, and you're going to see in this book, in this poem that I read, how much I loved you. And I wanted to leave with that thought that when you get old and you pull down your yearbook and you pull out some papers or things, you're going to recall that the time we spent in English literature was time well spent, and time that we enjoyed together, and that we found truth and meaning in some of the words that famous people wrote. And it's been well worth spending our time that way. Thank you.